The War of 1812, a war of consequences. Even though the War of 1812 brought peace between the U.S. and Great Britain, it was a diplomatic and overall failure for the U.S. The United States' diplomacy with Great Britain was substandard because of the events of the war. America itself did not gain anything. The U.S. Treasury went bankrupt, the economy collapsed, and there was an enormous loss of life. The United States-British conflict arose from the American grievances over oppressive British maritime actions in the Napoleonic War, a war fought between Great Britain and France. To administer their blockade in French ports, they boarded U.S. trading vessels and seized cargo that was suspected of being sent to France, while impressing the U.S. sailors that was alleged to be British Navy deserters. The United States' hatred for Great Britain grew immensely after this deed. Congress was immediately thought up a retaliation plan for this. Instead of stooping to the British's level and impressing their sailors, the U.S. reacted by passing an Embargo Act of 1807, which restricted U.S. trade with any major country, such as Britain and France. This act was introduced and enforced by President Thomas Jefferson. President Jefferson assumed that both countries would cease attacking American ships, but things did not turn out as Jefferson expected. In the duration of 1 year, Americans' exports went from 109 million to 25 million. Prices of crops went down, and tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. Congress repealed the Embargo Act in 1809, just before Jefferson left office. They then passed a new law that reopened trade with all other countries except France and Britain. Britain and France still did not respect America's decision to stay neutral during the war, and they then began seizing American ships and cargo for use for war. Many ships were destroyed. All of the cargo was stolen, and there was a countless amount of sailors that were taken from their ships and forced into British and French captivity to work on their naval vessels. After 3 years of constant impressment and cargo loss, the United States had decided that they had to take action. President James Madison gave a riveting speech to Congress on why America should go to war with Great Britain. And on June 1st, 1812, the U.S. signed the Declaration of War, and it was on this day that America was pulled into an age of tragedy and death. The initial battle that both countries undertook was the invasion of Canada. Both countries wanted to have total control over Canada. America invaded Canada on July 12, 1812, and they unfortunately were defeated by the British. 2,500 poorly untrained farmers, merchants, and young adults were brutally massacred in this battle. Several months later, the U.S. launched a second invasion of Canada, and they were defeated once more. This was a major loss for the United States. At this time, almost half of America's army was either dead or under British enforcement. The Americans suffered many other losses, such as the Battle of Queenstown, the Battle of Rains and River, and the Battle of Chrysler's Farm. At the end of the war, Americans had lost more than 2,000 men, women, and children. Even though America had won the last battle, it had ended in a peace treaty. It was a devastating loss for the American people. Death was not the only consequence of the War of 1812. Toward the end of the war, the New England states wanted to secede from the United States because of the massive amount of death. The New Englanders were not very fond of James Madison. They thought the War of 1812 as James Madison's war, because Congress went to war because of his speech. Nearing the end of the war, the New England states threatened to leave the Union if the Congress did not demand for a peace treaty. But that month after that, the Treaty of Ghent was signed. The other major consequence of the war was the National Bank going bankrupt. Since the bank had to pay for all its war debts and casualties, the bank lost all its money and the economy went into chaos. The National Bank going bankrupt is probably one of the worst things that could ever happen to America. People lost jobs, businesses, and homes. The government could not even pay off its debt, which before the war was $45 million, but it escalated into a 120. The diplomacy before the War of 1812 was terrible. There were many impressments and a lot of people died, but the War of 1812 actually brought the two countries closer together after the war. After the Treaty of Ghent, the United States' diplomacy with Britain was surprisingly better. They traded with each other, peacefully, and there were no more impressments between the two. The War of 1812 was indeed an unnecessary war that the United States was in. The U.S. went to war when they had such an obsolete military, only to make it smaller. The economy went into chaos, and the national debt increased. The War of 1812, in every way, was a failure of the United States history.
Is that it?
That's it.